Hi, I'm your co-host, Captain Nostalgia. This is the Cage Corner podcast, and my favorite color is magenta.
And I'm your co-host, Micah Kimber. I don't have a funny nickname like you do. I'm not gonna use my Instagram handle or anything, but I do have a handlebar mustache right now, and Josh thought it was funny when I walked in today. Brother.
And this is, I guess, the first of a two-part episode where we're going to be doing.
Yeah.
This is a cross collaboration between another Victims and Villains podcast spinoff called Coffee and Conversations, and we're going to be covering Valley Girl from 1983 today.
Yeah, it was fun. It's I got it on tape a couple months ago, and it is. So at the top of the actual box, it says "Introducing Nicolas Cage."
Do you understand why that is?
It's his first starring role, I believe.
This is actually the first time that he has ever actually billed as Nicolas Cage.
That's
Prior
true.
to this, he was always billed as Nicolas Coppola.
That's true. Yeah, it's his second film. The first film being Fast Times at Ridgemont High. He played a really small role, but yeah.
Which is crazy to think about, that you go from something as tiny as a minor role in an iconic film as Fast Times.
Yeah.
And then you're just star-studded to top billing actor.
Yeah. I don't know how did this movie perform? Do you know?
It holds an 83% right now on Rotten Tomatoes. So it's actually
wildly high.
Fairly regarded as one of his better movies.
One of Nicolas Cage's better films?
Yes.
Oh, Rotten Tomatoes.
I can't tell you about box office, but I don't have any box office. Sure. But I do have some film trivia if you would like to get started with that.
Cool. Yeah. Let's do that.
All right. So the wild thing about this is, this is a movie directed by a female director, which was not really that predominant of a thing in the 80s.
Sure.
So this film is already kind of changing that. But the director, Martha Coolidge, was actually required, are you ready for this? Required to show female breasts 4 times in the movie.
Required.
It was a contractual obligation. Required to show it 4 times.
Between her and the studio?
Between her and the producers. Because they thought that it would actually attract a young male audience.
Okay.
I mean,
the movie probably would have done that anyway.
I don't know. I think that's kind of a dumb obligation that you have to have.
It really is. Because that's not it's not one of those things. I feel like nudity almost never adds to a story, and so it's all right, that's random, but all right.
Especially for something that takes place in high school?
Yeah. Oh, man. Dude, that was... honestly, if we can jump back for 1 second to talk about Fast Times, Fast Times is about a girl who is not a senior in high school, and it's you see her topless. Yeah. Implying that she's not 18, and you see her topless.
Yeah, the 80s was a weird time.
Yeah, it was a lawless wasteland. I think that one was the year prior. I believe that one was 82. Yeah, but anyway... that is strange. All right.
You ready for this?
Yeah.
The script for this movie was written in 10 days.
I could see that.
10 days.
Although, I will say, that definitely raises my opinion of the film. Because the script is... it's funny. It's really not bad at all. There are some parts that it's all right, this is a little bit awkward or whatever, but, it's pretty great. Edited, revised everything.
Yeah. Can you do me a favor?
Sure.
Can you feel my hands? They're a little wet.
Oh my god.
Julia's dad is the best part of this movie.
Yeah. honestly, he's I was so glad that you mentioned. All right, so yeah, the main girl character's name is Julia, and her dad is basically
Uncle Rico.
He's basically Uncle Rico from
Napoleon Dynamite.
Napoleon Dynamite. And I was so glad when you said that, because immediately it made me like the movie more, not just because of that comparison itself, but because I was yeah, the beginning, like, third or so of this film feels directionless, and so does Napoleon Dynamite.
Well, I think the reason for Valley Girl feeling directionless is because you spend the first act of this movie at a party.
Yeah.
With no real context for these characters.
It's just like, oh, there are high schoolers, and now they're at a party, and they're talking about boys, and the boys are talking about girls, and that's just kind of it. It's an 80s teen drama comedy kind of thing.
Yeah, they're stock characters. They don't ever actually... Right. Julie, Fred, and Tommy, and then Nicolas Cage's character, Randy, who we don't even learn his name...
Until Act 2.
Until this beginning of Act 2.
Yeah.
But they're like the only ones that really feel fleshed out. But you have like all of these like other characters that surround them, and it's like, why should I care about these characters? Especially Elizabeth Daily, who plays one of the friends in here. She's the voice of Tommy Pickles.
Yeah, which is interesting because she had like what could have been a pivotal scene. Yeah. I mean, I guess we can kind of get into that. Let's get through some of this trivia. Yeah.
I got a little bit more for you. Originally, this is interesting for the Julie character, is Michelle Pfeiffer was actually originally considered. Which would have made this movie significantly different.
Yes, it would have. It probably would have performed differently too.
But she was not the only one that was cast as Julie, as we'll tell you in a later fun fact.
Okay.
But no, I think Deborah Foreman, who plays Julia, just never... I don't think I've ever actually seen her in anything else.
No.
But Michelle Pfeiffer, has gone on to have some significantly...
For sure.
Pivotal, heavy cultural impact performances.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Do you think that, because I know it can definitely be said that certain shows and movies benefit really heavily from having kind of a no-name cast? Do you think that this movie does? Do you think that, because at the time, I mean, Nicolas Cage wasn't really anybody significant. So do you think that this movie benefits, or even that Nick Cage benefits from the fact that the cast of this movie is not really significant?
Well, I mean, you got to keep in mind, too, is Elizabeth Daily is a great example. So she's someone that I only know what she looks like because of behind-the-scenes documentaries that they've done with Rugrats.
Sure. And
I've also seen her in, oddly enough, some other B-movie horror movies.
Okay.
So, you don't really know who she is.
Right.
She's never someone that really kind of rose to the predominance of, say, a Nicolas Cage.
Sure.
And not a lot of the casting here do it. So... Also, looking at the landscape of things, I don't even know really how Michelle Pfeiffer being in the Julie character, how that would have changed or impacted this film at all. Because a lot of the actors in this, I think, are not really... They're either character actors or they never kind of rose past the 80s for this film. So I don't know, honestly, how that would have impacted to have a big-name star grace the set.
Yeah. It may have even it may have even been for the better, just because if you've had a bigger name actor, then Nicolas Cage may not have really been pushed forward like he probably was with his first starring role.
Yeah, and I mean, he's still a few years away from Moonstruck, which is an episode we've previously done. And obviously he's still
Raising Arizona.
Yeah. He's still a couple years away from, Con Air and Face Off. So
for sure.
He was still on the trajectory to blow up in a significant way.
Yeah.
I guess we'll talk about this a little bit later. I saw this influence, but I don't know if you did or not. But in the dating montage, there is a scene where there's a deep kiss that takes place in front of a marquee reading Romeo and Juliet, which was one of the film's inspirations.
Okay, wow.
I felt like I saw that. That kind of occurred to me very early in the film. I don't know if you kind of got that Shakespearean vibe at all.
Yeah. I mean, now that you mention it, it makes sense. But I also, I have never read or viewed anything at Shakespeare, so there's just that.
So 2 more fun facts for you. The first one being the club scenes where Randy and Fred take the girls when they first meet after the party. Was actually a Sunset strip club named, oh man, are you ready for this name?
I'm ready.
Filthy McNasties.
Beautiful.
Filthy McNasties was opened in the 60s and the 70s. It changed ownerships and became a club in the early 80s called the Central. And actually by the late 80s, early 90s, it was purchased by Johnny Depp.
Interesting.
And it got changed to the Viper Room, which in 1993 actually marked the infamous overdose of River Phoenix in 1993.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
I saved the best for last, though.
All right.
So going back to the original Michelle Pfeiffer thing.
Yeah.
Michelle Pfeiffer was originally considered for the role. Deborah Foreman, who was actually cast in the movie, is not actually who is on the cover art for the poster, the VHS, the DVD, or the Blu-ray. It is actually actress Tina Thurbridge, who is Samantha in the movie. And she is shown in the making up bathroom scene in the third act after she breaks up. And it's Randy's, chronologically in this universe, it's Randy's ex-girlfriend.
Right.
But yeah, it is not. It's Samantha on the cover, not actually
Wild.
Julie.
Gosh, that never even hit me because I mean, like, obviously I've seen the cover, but wow, that's insane.
Yeah,
that's too. So does that imply that Samantha is also like a Valley girl, and he maybe kind of has a type, and she like tried to find him there?
No,
or?
so Tina, the actress, was actually cast in the role of Julie.
Oh, she just was in general, and they just kept the
and then Deborah,
photos.
Deborah, like stepped in. I don't know, like to what extent like that exchange happened.
Sure,
but originally casting was done with Tina.
That's so cool.
Yeah,
that's so weird, but so cool.
Yeah. So, well, I guess let's head into general thoughts on this movie, man.
Sure. Okay. The movie. It's not a slow burn, but it does start kind of without context. You know, you get sort of just like a high school shopping montage.
She's
Valley
a
girl.
hunk.
Like, yeah, they're just like, they're just checking out guys, and they're just like, you can tell the movie, like, the writers are really just trying to establish the lingo, you know, with them saying like every other word and totally and all that kind of stuff. And, and then it's just all of a sudden like, oh, there's a party tonight. And it's like, are you going to go? Okay. And then there's like a beach scene and you see Nick Cage for the first time. And anyway, I'm not trying to walk through the movie, but, the movie is like, it's really fun from the get-go, but it definitely takes all the way through the first act before you really have any sort of like what feels like a plot or a context. I don't know. I liked it, you know, if that's what you want to hear. Like, I did like the film. It's fun. It's a really, so Josh, we've talked about this before, how like, a lot of people don't, like the weird Nicolas Cage that we think of when we think like, oh yeah, Nicolas Cage. Like, some people don't seem to really recognize that until like after his Ben Gates role.
Yeah.
And a lot of like the weirder roles that he got after that, the National Treasure film. But I think this movie at least shows glimpses of just that like stilted kind of weirdness. And it's really fun. It's really, really cool.
Yeah, this movie doesn't seem like it was thought out.
No, it does not.
Until like the second act. Like, it's like the writers like went into Polygram, who's the studio, and were like, we have this idea for a punk rock version of Romeo and Juliet.
Right.
And they're like, great. And how do the characters meet? And they were just kind of like, we'll get back to you.
Yeah.
And that's where you can kind of feel that like 10-day influence start to take place.
Yeah. I love that you brought up the punk rock thing. It's very much the vibe it is, where it's just like, you go in, it's like, all right, so he's supposed to be a punk and she's supposed to be a Valley girl. Okay. And I felt myself at times like being a punk fan. I felt myself like waiting for there to be more punk influence. But I also realized that like 1983 punk is still fairly new. And then like what punk looks like and sounds like is different to different people, and I think that they didn't like push too hard for like the punk image, because I think it would have been a lot more like just contrasting to the Valley Girl image, and I think the Valley Girl image is probably a little easier to sell at the time. But there are a lot of little like random little punk things that are a lot of fun, haircuts and stuff like that. There's a Circle Jerks poster in one of the bathrooms, and all the music is new wave, which a lot of people define as like punk rock but safe. Yeah, that's all like really kind of weird and cool.
Yeah, that's another IMDb fact I came across, was that the film was pitched as punk rock. There's never any punk rock actually in here.
No.
It's all new wave.
Yeah, it's all new wave. And new wave was just like I said, it's kind of regarded as safe punk rock, or marketable punk rock, if you will. But there's like, it's very obvious that they try to like make Nick Cage, his character Randy, and Freddie, is that his best friend's name?
Fred Bailey.
Fred Bailey. Yeah, it's obvious that they're like very punk influence and stuff, but then like all the songs on the radio, they're like, oh, I like this song. It's like not punk at all, not at all. But it's like, okay, well, it probably didn't want to like polarize their viewers or whatever.
I don't know. I think some of my favorite sequences are the juxtaposition scenes, where him and Fred are going to the Valley party, and then a few minutes later you have Julia and her friends stepping into the world of punk and clubs, and it was just such a nice juxtaposition, kind of like foreshadowing of how their relationship would unfold, and I really kind of liked that. Like that's the point in the movie where I really started to appreciate it, because like you, I think that this movie is fun but problematic. Yeah, and kind of also really shallow in the same
for sure
same way. Like there are some of the sequences, like Tommy is a despicable character.
He's terrible.
Tommy is just a terrible human being, and then you also have all of her friends that basically bring her down to this like ultimatum. It's like, you either be unhappy and end up with Tommy, and also, by the way, we'll still be your friends, or you go with Randy. You can be happy,
but we won't be your friends anymore.
We won't be your friends. So it's like, which ultimatum do I do?
Yeah, it's really just like, the movie's really shallow. It's really like, if you want to pick substance out of it, you could. You could talk about like the peer pressure themes and stuff like that. You could talk about like Julia's relationship with her parents, which is actually kind of fun and cool. But then there are so many things in the movie. The thing that frustrated me the most about the movie is there were like little things that they like took a good amount of time to build and explore, and then never brought any satisfaction to at all.
I think I'm gonna jump off of you, and possibly get inside your mind real quick.
All right.
What is the deal with this cougar subplot?
Yo, exactly. Exactly. And it's like, oh man, this is a Stifler situation. And it's like, it could be really kind of like, it could be kind of funny. It could be kind of like weird, like intentionally weird and interesting. And then they just abandon it. Like for no reason, never get back to it.
It's not, it's not even that. It's like Skip never has anything to offer the larger narrative.
No, never. He's just there. He's just an attractive guy at the first party that gets noticed by Beth. Like Beth, an attractive mom, and like it was the party mom. It was like the mom of the house, and then like she flirts with him throughout the movie, and then he does it with her daughter.
Well, so that scene in particular, I guess we're a little bit into this, so spoiler alert. Even though I think we've touched on the ending by this point.
Yeah.
It's a little late, but
the movie doesn't feel like it has spoilers. Like, because it's not plot heavy.
No, it's not. And, but like that scene in particular where they're like, all right, Skip's like, hey, Beth, I'm just here to return your daughter's book. And then he like goes up, and then it's like, they're like, all right, like, this is the infidelity shot, like, right here.
Here we go. It's the mom.
The cougar payoff right now, and then you see it, and it's like, it's the daughter, and it's like...
And it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter, because they're already together in the movie, but also at the same time, why do you have to have...
The subplot.
that subplot at all.
Right. It doesn't make any sense. That's the real frustrating one, I think. But there was another one that like could have affected the plot really deeply that they just didn't touch. And that was I forget her name, but you've talked about her multiple times. The girl who played Tommy Pickles.
Elizabeth Daily.
Yeah, her character. So like she in the first party gets taken advantage of by Tommy, who was just dumped by Julia.
Ironic, really.
Yeah. And he's like, yeah, true. And he's like, he like takes advantage of her, and they're like making out, and like that's the first, topless scene, and
wait, were you keeping track of the topless scenes in this movie?
I wasn't keeping track. It just happened. My wife always points it out. That doesn't matter. So anyway, they like, they're messing around and stuff, and he's like, man, like it's pretty low of you to like try to make a go at me after your friend just dumped me, but I won't tell anybody if you don't tell anybody. And it's like real just slimy and gross and horrible, and like they really try to establish that okay, Tommy's a douchebag, but what could have happened is like later on in the movie, instead of like rallying around Tommy and being like, oh, Julia, you should get back with Tommy and thus stay with us. You're shallow AF friends. She could have been like, hey, I need you to know that Tommy took advantage of me. Like that kind of thing. And it could have made a whole world of sense, and it could have pitted Julia against Tommy and thrown her back into the arms of Randy. But no.
Yeah, this movie's problematic on a few different levels.
Yeah.
At least by today's standards.
Yeah, for sure.
But like again, the world of the 80s is just a really interesting place to exist.
Yeah, and it's fun. It's like, God, it's so aesthetically pleasing. It really is, and like it's really cool to like so. The like montage at the beginning where they're like, you see how they originally ran credit cards and like stuff like that. It's like, oh, this is so neat and cool, and like it kind of feels vintage in a way. But then, yeah, you're not left with a very satisfactory writing.
Let me pull out another thing too that I had an issue with, and it kind of goes back to the whole like Beth being a cougar thing.
Yeah,
is what is the deal with parents in this universe?
Okay,
hitting on teenagers.
Yeah,
like, I don't have a problem with the way they look, the way that you do. We'll talk about that in a second.
Dude.
But like Julie's dad, Uncle Rico, I got Uncle Rico vibes immediately because he's like, if I was 20 years younger.
Yeah, to Julie's friend, like right in front of his wife, right in front of his daughter. Man, if I were 20 years younger, and that's all he says. But it's just like, I guess that was regarded as like a charming comment in the 80s. Maybe, I don't know, but it's like that's not cool.
That's like the equivalent of telling a girl that she has a nice rack before telling her she has a nice smile.
That's true. And it's like, okay, I mean, yeah, it's a compliment, but it definitely
not the compliment you want. Not something that's gonna build your self-esteem.
Exactly. It's just like it kind of exposes like, the way the thought process of the complimenter is.
It's like, come on, bro. Like, you're better than this.
Yeah. But you're totally right. Like, you have the first house party, and it's like, okay, there are parents facilitating a house party in which there are kids upstairs in the bathroom smoking weed, making out, like, and the parents are just downstairs mingling. And then there's freaking Julia's parents. Julia's parents are kind of cool, and I think she has a pretty okay relationship with her parents because, like, it's all really just, like, she actually goes to her parents and talks to them and has asked for their advice and stuff like that. And in my opinion, it's refreshing to see because I've seen so many movies where, like, they just pit the kids and parents against each other for, I guess, just for the sake of drama.
Sure.
But anyway, like, her parents are just, like she stays out all night, and they're just like, hey, we understand that, like, you're at that age and nature has a way, but we just want to know that you're safe and that whatever you're doing, you and the people around you are safe. And that's it. And it's just like, all right, well, it's interesting what you define as okay. But they also established that, like, her parents did go to Woodstock.
Yeah,
so they're probably a little bit more, like, groovy, if you will, like.
I will just refer to Julie's dad. I believe we're like half hour into this podcast, and we keep saying Julia, and it's Julie.
Is it?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure.
Rip.
That's anyways. Moving forward, I will refer to her dad as Uncle Rico.
Uncle Rico, yes.
There's a scene where Uncle Rico is toking up in the bathroom.
Yeah, and it's hilarious. Like, that's another thing that has got to be said about this movie in the pros section of the review here. The movie is funny.
Yes,
the humor holds up very well.
I think most of the part of it is that it's so like left-handed, like it just comes out of nowhere.
It comes out of nowhere. Yeah, it's little comments. It's things that like maybe weren't funny to begin with, but now that it's not the 80s anymore, you look back and it's like, wow.
Yeah.
Like stuff like that. And then there's of course like the what you might expect as the Nicolas Cage scenes. The scenes where he's like spitting food onto people's lap and it's funny for some reason and like weird stuff like that. He's just like he's what was the one scene where he's like letting them into the movie theater and he's like, hey, I hope you enjoy your flight.
Yeah. Is this movie in 3D? No, but your faces.
It's just so dumb and good and like just funny.
Yeah, I think a lot of things too. Like there's another scene with Uncle Rico where like he looks down at his sandals and he has this like almost like crisis moment.
Yeah.
And his wife's like, what's wrong? He's like, my Woodstock sandals broke. And they're like having this like 2-minute, like 3-minute like discussion about like where the sandals originated from.
Yeah.
Like it's
like
it's funny.
I like stuff like that because it's like charming little details that aren't necessary, but they add, kind of fun depth to characters and stuff like that. But yeah, the movie's really weird. What it chooses to take time on and what it doesn't choose to take time on. It's very strange.
I think one of my favorite things in this that we talked about at the beginning of the podcast is how Shakespearean this is.
Sure.
There's very much, here you have Julie who comes from the world of prim and proper upper class, goes to Valley High, and then you have this like really grungy, just like really dark kid in Nicolas Cage that goes to Hollywood High. And the tagline for this was something along the lines of like when prom queen meets punk rock.
Yeah.
And it's in that world you have like two star-crossed lovers that everyone on both sides like doesn't want them to be happy together, like and they're trying to find a way to like navigate through this world and eventually just find happiness in the arms of each other.
Sure. Very
much Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah, I mean their initials are R and J.
Yeah. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah. Randy and Julie. Yeah.
But I do like some of the conversations that they would have throughout the film about like kind of like their different worlds.
Yeah,
and
like identity and stuff.
Identity and like what friends would say. And
absolutely.
I wrote down the line that Nicolas Cage says it's the way that we do things that makes the difference.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes at the tail end of that very just like empty first act.
Yeah.
And it kind of like comes out of nowhere where it's like these guys are talking about like morals and values about like what really matters. And
yeah,
I think it says a lot about kind of, I think for us, like both of us, we come from kind of Randy's world.
Right.
And
for sure.
I don't know if you've ever seen The Craft, but there's a movie, there's a quote in that where just an average adult like tells like these 4 witchcraft girls, Wiccans, to beware of the weirdos, and she's like, "We are the weirdos, mister." And it's like that line is always kind of like stuck with me because like growing up, like I went through a phase where like I was constantly trying to chase Julie's crowd, and somewhere in high school I ended up in Randy's crowd, and like I've never kind of looked back, but it's always been strenuous on my mental health to kind of like chase fads and stuff like that. And sometimes I get caught up in it when it comes to stuff with victims and stuff like that. And because you're trying to outreach people, and but it's exhausting.
Sure.
To try and like not be true to yourself, and I love that theme of kind of like that's ultimately how their connection and their relationship starts.
Yeah, there's kind of in a weird like antithesis to that. There's actually a somewhat important conversation that Julie has with her friends at like that diner at the table, and it's a really frustrating scene. If you're like, rooting for her and Randy, but like her friend is like, it's just like really lonely being popular. And one of the other ones like, yeah, but it doesn't have to be, and it's just kind of like this weird opposing view of just like, man, if you want to be popular, you're always probably going to be trying to please somebody and not yourself. But at the same time, you're always going to be around people who are trying to please other people and not themselves. And it's not like, it's this weird, uncomfortable place of just like instability where like you have the attention of other people, but you don't have the satisfaction.
Yeah. And that's something that we've been talking about lately here, Victims and Villains, pretty heavily, whether it was our last episode on the little things or our upcoming episode on the faculty, where here you have two characters and that are basically like, at what point do you stop pleasing others around you and start taking your mental health just as seriously?
Yeah.
Because eventually you're putting in so much work and so much effort for people that may or may not like you.
Sure.
And ultimately you are hurting yourself in the process.
Sure.
And that's a really damaging place to be as well.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. But I'm glad you wrote down that line that he says to her, and just like, because they're talking in that club, and he's just like, she's like, well, we go to parties and we like buy clothes and we do all this stuff, and he's like, yeah, we do that too. We just do it differently or do it for different reasons, and it's just kind of the idea of like, and they listen to music too, but then they criticize her music, and they're just like, this music is honest. It has emotion. Yeah. It's raw. It's that kind of thing. And it's just like, yeah, we just do stuff because we want to, and not because of like our friends or trends or like our high school or where we live or upbringing or whatever, which is cool. Cause I think that like, it's interesting how much Julie's parents actually reflect more of that ideal than that of her friends. And she goes to them, and they're always just like super supportive.
Yeah, it's good to always surround yourself, whether that's family or that's friends, with people that are going to support your happiness.
Sure.
And your own mental stability over what the crowd wants.
Right.
Because here you have a situation where Julie could go this way and end up with a guy that was controlling, abusive, and just all around a douchebag.
Yeah.
Terrible for her mental health.
Sure.
Just to please her friends. Or she can actually go with a guy that treats her in a very honest and very genuine way, makes her very happy, and lose her friends.
Yeah.
And it's like, how much of your mental health are you willing to sacrifice before you embrace happiness?
Yeah.
I think that's something that we don't really consider when it comes to mental health, is the sacrificial portion of wanting or needing to make sure that your health is first and foremost.
Yeah.
Like, it's cool to like consider and like support others.
Yeah.
But if your mental health isn't in proper working condition, how can you properly support and love others the way that they need to be supported and loved? Yeah.
I'm really glad you use like the term sacrificial, because like I think a lot of times too, even when we try to do that, when we try to put like, all right, I'm going to put my mental health first, I'm going to put my own like sort of self-love and priorities before other people, because if I don't, then my world's going to fall apart and other people aren't even going to matter. Like, it's interesting because I have also found that like as important as that is, that also does sometimes mean laying aside the things that we want or would rather have for even our own betterment. Like, and it really ends up being sacrificial. I mean, I think like the most simplest example of this I could talk about is just like, you know, like maybe it's a food thing, you know, maybe it's just like, hey, I need to be healthier. And a lot of times I eat in an unhealthy manner because it makes me feel better. And while that might make me feel better, what I need is to be better. And feeling better doesn't always cope. It doesn't always work, you know, and it's not good in the long run.
No, comfort food is a very real thing.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that you kind of use that as an example to talk about it, because there's this relationship that exists between our mental health and our physical health that I think we have this like idea of separation and this idea of divorce, that that one doesn't affect the other. And it's like, well,
not true.
It's not true.
Yeah.
No. And there's lots of studies out there that'll prove you wrong.
Yeah.
And lots of deaths, I would even imagine, that have been, proven, or even early deaths that have backed that case up as well. And I don't want to shame anyone, like, if you're like, oh man, like, food's kind of my comfort spot.
Sure.
But also at the same time, like, you know, understanding like that there has to be healthy limitations.
There has to be balance,
balance when you're doing it. And I think that's something that Julie like needed to kind of confront with herself, because like, you know, we're both men of faith, and so it's like, I think both of us were raised in the church. And so there comes this point where you have these ideas of, okay, my parents, my mom and dad told me God is real. Why do I believe what I believe? And I think for Julia, that's another like identity crisis that she's going through, is like,
it's with her friends though.
Is with her friends, and it's with her love life. You know, why am I so drawn? Why am I so attracted to this guy that seems to be so wrong and so scary? And Julie's friends says when they go to the club, these guys look like they're sick.
Yeah.
And, you know, she just makes these like really like derogatory comments. Yes. And like, I get it. Like, the music that we like isn't going to be for everyone. The movies that we like aren't going to be for everyone. But also at the end of the day, it comes back to that idea of whatever makes you happy. And I enjoy that they're exploring that concept of happiness and joy, and how it's linked to positive and healthy mental health. Yeah.
Yeah. And like, I think, well, I wanted to continue with the food thing for one other second, but like,
I kind of drifted off there, didn't I?
No, it's fine. Totally fine. 'Cause you made valid points, but like, they even talk about it. Like, you even see it in the movie where in Act 3, you see where like she tells off Randy and it sucks and it's stupid, and he goes immediately to the bottle, you know, and then he just like, I'm going to abuse alcohol because I've been abused and that's how I feel, you know, and it's terrible, but like, it's how he chose to cope and how he chose to like get through, you know. And then there's even a conversation, and we kind of like laughed at it because they play it off like it's kind of funny and passing, but I think it's valid. And they talk about, Julie and her friends are talking about like, they use a couple terms, but the main one is splurging and purging, you know. And they talk about the idea of like, you know, you just eat whatever you want and then you just throw it all back up. And they're not necessarily advocating for it, but it's just very much just like, all right, well, this is it's obvious that like this is a conversation and something that is like they're having to view and have opinions about in their social circles, you know. And it's really dangerous to kind of like brush up against those things, and if you don't know like how to handle them, you know.
Yeah, body like dysphoria disorder. I think I said that right. Body dysphoria disorder. BDD is a very real thing that we've touched on a few times here at Victims and Villains, and most notably this year we had a writer review a Shudder original movie called The Queen of Black Magic. And one of the characters in that actually suffers from that. And so I was like, well, as a male, like I've never gone through that, and so I
Sure.
reached out to Abigail Bardwell, who is the writer that is going to be coming on to Victims in the coming weeks. But she kind of has gone through that, and so she spoke to that. And, you know, I think in the 80s, too, like, we also, like, don't really understand mental health because we're still understanding and still feeling the effects of, like, Vietnam and, like, how men and people in general just kind of process mental health and mental disorders and mental anguish and just a lot of the things that, you know, so you have those offhanded comments like splurging and
splurging and purging.
And then, you know, you also had like the rise of like the mall, so like you're taking that same exact kind of energy and like you're drowning yourself in debt and unnecessary clothes and Nicolas Cage's Randy that we see at the end. Like, you know, my wife made the comment when we were watching it that, you know, alcoholism and depression, I mean, that's just a dark hole. It's a bad combination. And then you also have the Samantha girl that he ends up hooking up with there afterwards. You know, you're just looking for vices to continually numb whatever pain you're feeling, and it goes back to that example of overeating or comfort food that we mentioned, that, you know, there are a lot of unhealthy vices that we turn to, whether that's media, whether that's food, it's alcohol, it's drugs, sex, you know, the list goes on. It's a dangerous place to be. Bottom line,
not because any of those things are bad in their contexts, you know, in a healthy context, but just because the idea that, like, it's that phrase turning to, you know, you're turning to X, Y, or Z instead of like choosing to actually like genuinely, you know, you're nursing your feelings, like you're nursing your pain instead of like just getting help and just trying to like heal regularly and normally and naturally and facing like, hey, this is how I feel, this is how I think, you know, and just being like, it's really hard to talk about how you think. It's really hard to be like, oh man, this is how I think about myself. This is how I think about my situation, you know?
Well, sure, because we always want to paint ourselves in the most positive light. Like, no one ever wants to post on Facebook, I'm miserable right now because so-and-so dumped me, or I'm sad because my dog just died. Like, nobody wants to talk about those things because it makes us feel vulnerable, and there are things that happen when vulnerability gets involved. And
you're receptive to pain. Like you feel more receptive to more pain.
And I think that this film showcases that really well with how Cage kind of takes that snap breakup, but he does come back. He does come back in some pretty creative ways.
Yeah, he does. He's just kind of just like, you know what, like, this is not me. This is not the low I want to be at, but like, I like this girl, and that matters, you know. And he's like, it's such a funny montage, but he just shows up everywhere she is, and it's
movies. Great. What is it, like a roller, like diner food?
Yeah, it was like a diner.
Car hop. That's the word I was thinking.
Car hop. Yeah. I used to be one of those.
Car hops. And then ultimately it culminates with him showing up to the prom. Where him and Fred actually tag team wrestle.
Yeah.
That scene with like Tommy like getting amped was just kind of weird.
Oh, that was weird because it was just like, oh, he like freaking Randy throws punches and he blocks him, and it's like, wait a minute, this douchebag knows like martial arts all of a sudden.
What is happening?
It doesn't. It's so dumb, but so funny.
Another thing that I really enjoyed about the soundtrack is I don't know about you, I was raised on 80s music.
Sure.
This soundtrack was killer.
It was so fun.
So good.
Yeah, it was so fun. I loved it a lot because, well, to be honest, I don't know. I get a little bored when like you reuse the same song more than once. So like, I Stopped the World. Yeah, it's like that movie was used in like a montage and then the credits, and it was like, well, there are more songs. you could have not used one twice, but that's just me wanting variety. But yeah, I mean, there are so many songs. What was that, like, Johnny, Are You Queer?
Johnny, Are You Queer?
Yeah, that song wasn't even recorded by anybody, I think, until I looked it up, until like 93. It was a song that was like written and circulated, but it wasn't actually like put on a recording until, like 10 years later. But it was written, I believe it was written in like 81. And yeah, it's like in this movie, and it's just like this sort of Joan Jett-esque kind of band for the prom, like, plays this song, and it's literally like, Johnny, are you queer? Like, it's asking a dude if he's gay. And it's so weird and funny, and it's very much like if you are a serious punk fan, don't go into this movie being like, oh man, this is going to be rad. It's going to have like, Ramones and Descendants and crap in the soundtrack. It's much more of a new wave film, but it's still really satisfactory in that.
With like the synth pop.
Yeah, like the synth pop stuff and like this flock of seagulls hairstyles and stuff. And
oh man, so like every year, that Spotify like will give you your most like listened to like artists and songs.
Yeah.
Consistently for the past 3 years, I have had at least one song from the 80s in my top 5.
That's amazing.
So I genuinely do love 80s songs, and like when they got to, I think it's Electric, it's either called Electric Avenue or Electric Boogaloo.
Yeah, Electric Avenue. Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
But like as soon as that song started up in the party in the first act, I was just like, yeah, I'm about it.
Here we are. Yeah. Yeah, it's great. It's great. Especially for being like early 80s and not like probably, because it's only 83, so this means they're probably filming in like 82. So it's not like what a lot of people think of as like 80s music, but it still feels really authentic.
Those like keyboards though, like they feel 80s though.
Yeah, they do, but it wasn't like, I mean, I feel like by 1982, 83, the biggest parts of 80s music hadn't come out yet,
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
So this before we get to our ratings,
sure,
I have 4 tally marks here in my notes that you asked me specifically to write down.
All right, well, it's not the topless scenes.
It could be the topless scenes.
It could be. There might actually have been 4. I did not count them. Those
I can count 2.
That is how many that is how many like music montages there are. That's how many times in the film from beginning to end there is like only music and people doing things, but no discernible dialogue. 4 times. 5 if you count the end credits and like the roll up to that.
That's fair.
And I was just like, how many unnecessary times do we need this? Like, I don't know. It was a lot. It was funny. I just wanted to point that out.
I feel like it's been a long time since I've watched a movie that has as many montages as this Valley Girl.
Right. Like one montage in like a feel-good movie, especially a movie where there is like driving, that kind of thing, because montages are really good for driving. So like probably the most famous one I personally think of is the first Muppet film.
I was gonna say Tommy Boy, but Muppets works good too.
Yeah. Yeah, like, it's just like, okay, one good, solid, fun montage makes sense. The movie begins with one. There's one toward the end of them, like, that party scene in, like, the club. There's one where they're driving around downtown, like, right before, like, Nick Cage just starts, like, yelling at people on the side of the road. Fantastic. And then there's one... there's one where he's, like, at every place where, like, they go.
She is,
like,
yeah. Did you count the one where they're dating? That's the original one that Simple Minds, I Stop the World will melt with you.
Oh, man. Yeah, there may have been 5.
Yeah, this movie, like, you
Too many.
You can feel... It's just, like, imagine, like, being the studio exec and just being, like, montage. This is
montage. Boobs. Montage. Boobs.
And they're like, oh man, this script is really montage heavy. And it's like I just don't feel like there was a lot of thought put into this.
Yeah.
And so let's just go to the rating on our Cage scale.
All right, I always do this first. No, you go first.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and give this a 2.5.
2.5? Yeah, that's what I was going to do. 2.5.
Like, I feel like there's, like, genuinely funny parts and, like, charming characters.
Yeah.
But, I mean, like, I'm holding the plot right here.
Yeah. That's one page.
Listeners can't see that. If you couldn't hear that, I was rustling paper. The plot is paper.
It's really thin. The plot, like, you can basically state that the plot doesn't start until the beginning of Act 2. There's a lot of it that's just like we said, like untied knots, whether it's the cougar thing or the whole like, oh, he took advantage of me, then that they never brought that back, and they could have. There are just so many little things like that, and there's things like the part with like the guy's sandal, the dad's sandal, he's just like broken, and it's just like this is a fun little detail, but what's the point really? Like it's just there are so many little things like that are just like this is.
I will give credit to the writing that I probably will quote certain points of this movie to other people. As I opened up this podcast and said my favorite color is magenta. Which is a nod to our introduction of Fred. My hands are wet that the dad says. Yeah. Where he goes like the prom night. He's like, you act like you're going to prom.
Yeah, there's funny parts. The characters that get developed are really fun and cool, and few and far between.
Yeah,
and it's fun. It's fine. I have extremely hard time believing that Rotten Tomatoes gave it an 83. I'm not gonna look up why, because I ultimately have a hard time respecting them, but it just blows my mind.
It is what it is, man.
But Shrek is also rated higher on Rotten Tomatoes than Endgame is, so like, it is what it is.
All right, well, we're going back to the Valley to do the 2020 version remake, which is oddly a musical for Coffee and Conversations. Not sure how I feel about that. It also has Jessica Roth from the Happy Death Day movies, so I'm interested in seeing her in a high school role after seeing her in a college role for so many films.
I really, really hope that we get some sort of homage, or maybe a cameo or something from the original.
Like Nicolas Cage just
shows up in this movie. He has a solo.
Honestly, all right, before we end this podcast, the ending of this movie where you have the what is it, like the teacher that's like talking about what king and queen means and like, what the prom is, like, honestly, I was waiting for that to finish and then like Nicolas Cage to like do a number for Julie and surprise her that way.
That would be amazing.
So that's going to do it for us. You guys can check out our parent show, Victims and Villains, wherever you guys get your podcasts from. Make sure that you guys hit subscribe so that way you guys don't miss our Coffee and Conversations Part 2 episode with Valley Girl 2020. And most importantly, if you or someone you know is struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, I encourage you guys to please reach out. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. There are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil, and internationally there are 800,000 annual suicides that take place. You guys can go to victimsandvillains.net, which you guys can also find in the show notes below, wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode, to get resources. This is the real reason we make this content, and we're so grateful for our patrons at our $5 tiers that make these episodes possible. So thank you guys so much for partnering with us and getting mental health resources into schools, and please understand that you have value and that you have worth. So we're going to go back to the Valley and go check out this second movie. We'll see you guys in a little bit.